Hi, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of The Magic Hour, Season 2. Hope you all had a great Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thanks for joining me. Today we have our first guest in the comedy section, Mr. Rob Farley.
Hey, how are you?
How you doing, Rob?
Oh, I'm all right.
Thanks for joining me. Hope everything's okay. Oh, I'll keep forgetting this. If you want to follow me, please follow me on my Instagram at Fame Film Agency and on my YouTube at Majid Andary. I keep forgetting to promote myself. And I'm supposed to continue to promote myself. When you're going into business, everybody's saying, make sure you continue to self-promote. And I keep forgetting that. So,
yeah, it's not really... I've had my own business since 2008. And the self-promotion thing is not something that I do much of.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably the key to part of that success is to...
Probably.
Continue to self-promote.
Yeah.
Well, Rob, I guess one of the first... We're going to have an interesting episode today. I've changed things up a little bit. I mean, I still have some of the basic questions that I ask everybody, but it's going to get more fun as we go along.
Okay, sure.
I want to try to make things a bit better.
I'll play along. That's all right.
But before we get started, are you going to be involved in this year's Fringe at all?
So, in 2024, I had my first solo show. I only really got into doing regular comedy, part of the comedy community in the start of 2021. And in 2022, I was like a regular guest on someone else's show. Mm. And then in 2023, I did like a split bill with Brian Pritchard.
Okay.
And then in 2024, I had a solo show. But 2024 was a tough year for me. There was a bunch of stuff that happened, family-wise and all that kind of thing, and I broke my leg at the end of the year, and stuff like that, and so I didn't do a show in 2025, and then for 2026, when I say I didn't do a show, I didn't register a solo show, and I haven't registered a solo show for 2026 either, but I was in some stuff. I did like a roast show, like a roasting based on nationality with
I love
where
roasting.
I roasted Kent Michael about who I think's a previous guest on your show. You spoken to Kent?
I haven't spoken to him before the New Year's. No,
but Canadian Kent.
Yeah, I know Kent. Yeah.
Sure. He and I roasted each other based on nationality.
Oh, that's great.
I represented Australia rather than the UK where I grew up, and that was fine. I figure with the cricket just having happened, I've had enough roasting for being English recently anyway. But so that was fun, and I'll hopefully join some lineup shows this Fringe.
Okay.
But and maybe 2027 I'll have got some stuff sorted better, and register a solo show again.
Well, you had what was it? Comedy Complex?
Yeah. So I ran a room back in May, June. May, June, roughly 2025.
That was a good venue.
It was, and sadly, so basically what happened is a friend of mine had a short-term lease on that building, and was trying to get lots of stuff happening to be able to then persuade the owners to extend the lease and so on. And one of the things that she was keen to do to be able to have the to demonstrate that it was being used and should keep being used was that I was doing open mic comedy, because I've felt for ages that Adelaide needs more open mic.
Yes.
I keep hearing of. I'll come back to this in a second. And so I did that, but then at the end, they sadly the owner didn't agree to an extension of the lease, and so the venue fell through, and I haven't got around to sorting out running something else somewhere else yet. And I know that I should. It's just there's been other stuff happening in my life that has meant that it's harder work. That's probably another topic of discussion.
Would it still be Comedy Complex if you find a different
No,
name?
the Complex was the venue name.
I see.
And so
I thought it was something that you came up with, kind of.
It was one of those things where we had the venue, and part of running the thing was to be able to promote the venue so that the guy who owned it felt like it was getting more visibility and so on as as a useful property, being able to be used for other events and all that kind of stuff. And so we wanted to involve Complex, which is the name that, we'd kind of come up with for the venue, because you saw it as like stairs everywhere and all that kind of stuff, a very industrial kind of feel, but interesting and so on. And we thought that Complex kind of suited it. And so now if I start something else, I'll rename it and I'll just rebrand the things so that I don't lose the followers. I'll just try and get new handles.
Okay, well, I hope that works out for you, because we do need more venues, and we do need places where not only can we do open mic, but we want to test our material for a real crowd.
Well, this is the thing, is that when I there's a bunch of places around where there's comedy, of course. I mean, Laugh Lab, as you know, is proper open mic on a Monday night at the Rhino Room, but I feel like that's the only place that if you go, I've written some jokes and I want to go and try them, that you can just turn up on a Monday and try and do it. Friday night at the Rhino Room, the Adelaide Comedy, no, it's completely curated. If you want to get a spot there, you've got to be able to ask Craig, however long in advance, and hope that there's going to be somewhere for you to perform there. If you want to do Thursday night at Nevermind Comedy on Lee Street that Clay McMath organises, you got to ask him and so on. Back when Ross Voss had Cranker, you needed to be on his list from a couple of months in advance. And so the idea of trying to write something and then go, where can I perform this? It's got to be open mic. I love that Ali Dent has open mic down at Christie's, but it's a couple of open mic spots and the rest is curated. What I was trying to do was say I want to have at least 6 or 7 open spots a week.
Yeah.
And because I want people to be able to say, I've just written some stuff, I want to turn up and try it. Yeah. Or I'm still trying to, last time I performed this, something didn't really click and I want to get up and do it again while it's fresh in my thinking. And
I'm glad that you said that, because I have noticed in the comedy world, here in Adelaide in particular, that not everybody who's in this field is getting a fair share.
Sure.
Like if I'm not naming names or anything like that. It's just something that I've experienced firsthand. If like I've known of people contacting people like in Nevermind and the Rhino, and they did it through the proper channels, and they don't even get any response. Not that they're getting a yes or a no. They just get ignored.
So what I don't want to get too caught up on the concept of clicks and so on, because I feel like in any community that is a thing. I love community. I'm involved in the database community through my work. I work in IT on databases, and there is a database community around the world, and there are conferences and so on. And people notice that there are certain people that will get selected for the prime spots at events, and that's a very hard group to try to break into, and that you need to be a particular kind of person and get along with the right kinds of people and so on. And I see that even in amongst churches. I go to church every week. I'm very involved at my church, and I see that people often they talk about churches mention the clickiness, I guess, of churches, the fact that there are people who do stuff, and when those people are kind of like hand selected, there's there can easily be that clickiness about it. I mean, no matter what community I'm in, because especially in the church, I don't want that to be a thing, and I will push hard against it and be like, hey, we need to make sure that, we're not becoming, a boys' club or a group. I mean, the obvious cliques are easy to be able to push against. Oh, look, like if 70% of our people speaking at a conference or helping out in a particular area of the church or on a comedy lineup, if 70% of them are, straight white men, that's easy to be able to go, okay, we should fix that. But I also recognize that if the people that are getting up are, feel like it's the same people each time, and the people that are missing out are often missing out, then that's frustrating.
It is.
I mean,
It's showing favoritism.
Yes, but what I want to mention is that it is hard as a room runner, as the organizer of somewhere. You need to be confident that what you're putting up is the right thing. Mm-hmm. That you're meeting, I suppose I'm going to say, like, enough quotas. That you're not coming across as being biased towards a particular subsection of the community and so on. And therefore, there are people, anybody who's involved in a minority, which is very much not me. I mean, I count as an immigrant, but only kind of, only because I grew up in the UK. But that's not really, a demographic that, I mean, I get that I'm totally privileged. It's easier for me to be able to do stuff. I haven't had the same kinds of battles as, somebody in any of the minority groups. Mm. So the idea that I might want to complain that, well, they got opportunities that I could have got, I have no business begrudging them that, because in general, it's easier for me to get by in life, right? I'm privileged, and I'm not going to pretend that I'm not.
Well, you don't hear that very often from white people.
Well, we should. It frustrates me when white people do a kind of a fake, I'm sorry for everything that's wrong in the world because obviously it's my fault, kind of a sentiment. And I'm just like, don't be like that. Be better than that. It's not, we all know that it's not your fault as an individual, but we can't deny that, privileged people in society have held back minorities, for a long time. Mm-hmm. Somebody who has had to fight against racism and sexism and homophobia and, all kinds of things. I've never had to fight against that. There are types of prejudice that I've had to fight against, but in general, nothing like those kinds of things. And so I'm not going to begrudge them that. But also, there's the thing of saying, when somebody turns up and they want to get a spot, and they've offended people in the past, or they are, I'm not looking at anything. I'm just kind of, it's that thing of just kind of looking at the blank wall to be able to.
No. I just keep every now and then you'll see me glancing to make sure the cameras are okay.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
I'm not looking at what you're looking at, like what's going on there.
Yeah, that's fine. I do notice though that when I'm talking to someone, I'll maintain eye contact for a while, but I also don't want them to feel uncomfortable. So I'll look away at some point.
But also, you'll also get me to look down at the timer here.
So of course. So I'm certainly one to go on. So if someone's come and put their name down, and they are somebody who has been offensive in the past, or they haven't got laughs, or they've constantly disrespected the room by going on too long and things like that, I totally get that person's not going to be high up on the list of let's get them up. Mm. It's frustrating when you start feeling like, maybe I'm in that bucket of people that they might not want on. Yeah, that can feel.
But that shouldn't be an issue then. Because you're still a member of the comedy society. And you still have
community. Let's say the community, because there's nothing that you join up. You don't join some sort of society.
But you're there. You're part of.
Yes.
You are contributing to it.
Sure. Totally.
Even if you're just attending to see somebody else, that's support.
Yeah.
And you're in the scene.
Yeah.
So everybody should be given a fair shot, regardless whether they may like you or may not like you.
Sure. But I want to point out, it's not completely straightforward for the person running the room. Mm. And there are certainly, I suppose, diversity considerations to make sure that you're not just putting up a whole bunch of people that essentially look the same and tell the same kinds of jokes, and that you're trying to discourage people who are doing stuff that shouldn't be happening on stage.
Yeah, that's a lot of responsibility for somebody that's organizing.
It is, absolutely. And that's part of why I think some people are, don't run rooms.
Is is this particular issue one of the biggest challenges in organizing a show, or?
I don't think it has to be, but I think there you have to have a degree of thick skin in the fact that when a rumor goes around that, oh, I turned up at such and such a place and I didn't get a spot and they don't like people like me or whatever the case may be, you know, you're going to hear those rumors and you need to be able to just go, look, it wasn't intentional, you know. And I mean, I've had times when I've rocked up to Laugh Lab and missed out on a spot, and it's frustrating, and they'll try and put me on the next week. And a couple of times I've missed out on the list 3 times in a row, and I was like, seriously, is this, you know, what the heck? And I get that it's not intentional, right? And that quite often it's a thing of just going, oh yeah, they've been on plenty, and they just haven't really paid attention to the fact that, well, actually we skipped them from last week and potentially even the week before, and they've got to have notes. When I ran a room, I had in my phone who's on each week so that I can actually, and who's missed out if someone's turned up and there hasn't been a spot available because they've turned up late or whatever the case may be. I maintain those lists so that I could make sure that I wasn't, you know, inadvertently missing somebody regularly. You know, I never liked to, somebody would get in touch early and they'd be like, you know, can I definitely get a spot? And I'd be like, I don't want to guarantee, but you know, I'll have you in my, like, you know, second priority list. There's the people who are guaranteed spots, but then there's people who turn up who are first timers or trying to get back after being away for a while. And then there's people that have said, hey, can I have a spot? And for those people, I kind of consider them like next priority, as opposed to people who have just kind of rocked up and they go, oh yeah, maybe I'll, you know, sure, why not? And those people are less of a priority than the others. But if they've turned up, you know, if they turned up one week and they, with that kind of thing, and oh yeah, can I get a spot? And I've turned them down, the next time they turn up and say, can I get a spot? They've bumped up the priority list. Yeah. You know, so, but it's on me as the room runner to make sure that I'm doing that. If somebody's got up and they've ignored the clock, and I like to make sure I've got a clock that's visible, so that somebody doesn't have to notice that they're being flashed with a light. Yeah. Because if they're looking at this, if they're looking here, they might not be seeing that. If they're wearing a cap, they might not see it. A lot of people don't see that red light. Yeah, and you've got strong lights in your face that you're trying to ignore anyway. And so the idea of an extra light appearing to tell you, I'm like, I just bought like a digital clock that I count up from 0 so that they can see. And so if they know that they've got 5 minutes and they see that it's on 4:40, they shouldn't be going into a bit that's a minute and a half long. You know, if it's 4:40, they should be wrapping up or doing a quick topper for the last joke they did, and then getting off. If it says 6 minutes, they should be like, oh, sorry, I'm way over time, I'm going to go. Yeah. You know? But that way, I'm like, but I had people who, when I was running the room, who would see that they were on 7 minutes and go, but the crowd's enjoying and I'm going to keep going. And I'm like, no, that is not how that works. Yeah. And the guy who I had that particular conversation with, he became less of a priority. And I told him, and I was just like, look, I get that you were feeling like the crowd was enjoying it, and I'm not going to say they weren't, but there's other comics. And, you know, and someone else might have been like, they were enjoying it and then they misread the room, right? Like, you need to respect the room. You might get away with it with some rooms, other rooms you won't. So so if you do that again, you know, I'm really going to be deprioritizing you from the list. I think I kind of maybe rubbed the Rhino room the wrong way in that sense, because my very first time... Okay, Rhino room meaning Laugh Lab or Rhino room meaning Monday night. Monday Laugh Lab, sure. Yeah. Because first of all, I wasn't told the rules, number one. Sure. And I was on the third bracket, which always sucks to be on the third bracket. Sure. And I had just been back to Australia after being gone for 16 years. And the 3-4 comedians that went on before me, they had 10, 12, 15 minutes on stage. Some of those might have been people who were explicitly told you could have longer for some reason.
I had no idea. I mean,
Yeah, I know. I get that.
I wasn't informed that at all.
Sure.
I figured if they got 15 minutes, 'cause I was like, they said try to keep it down to 5. I said no problem. But when I saw so many people have that time, I said, you know what, I'm going to do my 7-minute bit.
Yeah.
You know.
But what might have happened is because most nights they will have somebody who's been given 15 and somebody else has been given 8, and then and somebody may have easily just said, even on the night, there's a particular bit that I want to try. Can I have a bit of leeway? And if they've been given that, then sure.
Yeah, see, had I known that beforehand, I would have known because otherwise, because they cut me off. I hated that. I mean, because my bit was for 7 minutes.
That's frustrating. But if they've said 5,
yeah, but that's the thing, right? I wasn't properly informed.
Yeah. So
on my first night, I mean, I know the rules now.
Yeah.
But I felt like that my first because I was killing it.
Yeah,
I was. I felt that my first performance, they may have thought that I was trying to be arrogant, to take that extra time.
Yeah.
And I think that may have sabotaged some of my other appearances to want to go back there.
It can be hard. And I feel like there is certainly when they start to go, oh, hang on, that person doesn't really respect the room, then that can be hard to break out of.
Yeah, but I didn't want to. I didn't want that to be portrayed as that's what I was doing. Yeah. Because a couple of weeks later, when I went back, the guy said to me, I'm not going to say the name, but the guy said to me, listen, I'm going to give you 3 minutes. I can't do anything in 3 minutes.
So at Cranker,
it was like a punishment for going 7 minutes.
Sure. At Cranker, Ross would like to give first timers only 3 minutes, and I would look at that and be like, 3 minutes is harder than 5. And the first times I did Cranker, first couple of times I had 3 minutes, but I had done a bunch of, Laugh Lab spots and so on. I knew what 5 felt like. I had a set that was 5 minutes and so on. I was like, 3, what the heck? Come on. But Ross ran the ring. Mm-hmm. It was his call about that, and so I needed to respect that. Yeah, and it is hard when you go in feeling like you're prepared for a particular length, and then you get told something else. But at the end of the day, you've got to be able to work with the room runner.
Yeah,
and so there's times when I'd be like, I had a song that I used to do quite a bit that was like 3.5 minutes, and I knew that it was 3.5 minutes, and that once I started that's how long I'm going, and so then I tried to have my pre-song bit be only a minute and a half, but I would say to them, like, don't flash the light at me at 4.5 minutes, because if I'm halfway through a song, look, I will finish the song and get off the stage, and no matter when I start. When I finish a song, I'll get off the stage. Don't flash the light at me, because I'm not, if I'm halfway through the song, I can't just stop.
Yeah.
So I mean, I probably could have, but I negotiated that with them ahead of time. I would say, don't feel hard done by about being cut off.
I felt it at the time because like I said,
sure.
I didn't know the whole rules, and I felt, and if I had known that these the certain comedians were given that special treatment because of their status or whatever, then had I known, I'd be like, okay, cool, no, I understand. But I felt at the time, why do these people get this much, and I'm only getting this little?
Yeah,
I wasn't explained this, so I kind of took it as a personal hit.
It's probably not. It's probably not status so much, but for example, for Laugh Lab. Each week they advertise the host and the feature, and there's normally a second feature that they used to put on the poster, but they not so much these days. And that's often somebody who has missed out for a couple of weeks, and they go, "Look, come back and you can do 8 minutes that week or whatever." And my take is, I don't necessarily want 8 minutes. I just want to know that I've got the spot. But even if it's probably not status, it's probably more just that they have asked for longer or whatever the case may be. And I don't think it's personal. I would just say, come back, find out how long you've got. If you want to be able to do 7, say, can I do 7? If they're like, no, it has to be 5, then, do what you can. Stick a clock somewhere that you can see. I often take a clock with me, the same clock that I used at Comedy Complex.
I've seen that.
And I would take a clock and I'd get somebody to start it as I got up on stage so that I could look there and be like, okay, I'm on this. I feel like I've got a good sense of where the time is at, but depending on how things are going, especially if I'm talking to the audience and doing crowd work or whatever, I might have misjudged it a bit. But if I can just glance at the clock, I'm just like, no problem. And I can finish to within like 5 seconds of what I've got because I can see how the pace is going. I know what I'm planning to say. I know where a particular joke that might go for a while might have like effectively 3 stanzas to it. And you're like, okay, this bit takes roughly this long, this bit's, and if I'm looking at the clock and I can go, oh yeah, I'm kind of hearing this joke. I'm comfortable with that. And I know whether I can put that topper in or try something different or whether I should try making it sharper because, you end up needing to respond to what's happening because any particular performance is going to be slightly different just because it's a different night because they've had other comics on beforehand probably who have said different things and so on and things are reacting in different ways and people are responding or not responding. And if someone laughs for, if the crowd laughs for 5 seconds and, that's, if you've tried to get it, perfect to, I'm going to say to the minute, but no, to the second, if the crowd laughs or in fact doesn't laugh, you need to be able to adjust. If you miss some punchline, it's just some side note of a story that you're planning to do a callback to, you've then got to figure out how to address that while you're talking to the room. And so being able to see a clock, I think is critical. And if you look during Fringe, if you look for it, you can always see a clock in the room. Because if you've got a 45-minute, 50-minute probably booking for a room, someone else is coming on 10 minutes after you finish. And so your 50-minute slot, you'd better be finished at 45 because the room has to be gone by the time your slot is over so they can reset the room for the next act. If you accidentally do 55, that venue won't have you back the next year because you'll be upsetting the potentially interstate visitor or international visitor who's up next, who will have a queue outside. And if you've gone 55 when you had only booked for 50, that's a major problem. Comedians have to know how the time is going. So you can always see a clock in the room somewhere when, during Fringe. Ross Noble, with all his ad-libbing, has a massive clock at the back of the room. He has it hidden so you can only see it from stage or a certain, you can look for it and see it. Mm-hmm. But there's no way he could keep on time without that. And I'm just like, if Ross Noble has one, why doesn't every venue in Adelaide have a clock somewhere? And the room runner, I think, should make that happen. And if not, I'll bring my own clock so that I can see how I'm going.
What would you say as a comedian was your best experience you ever had on stage?
That's a few.
But do you have one that kind of separated that from the rest of the performances you've made?
So I'm gonna pick a time from before I was doing what I would consider proper comedy. I don't know that what I do now is proper comedy. I mean, I've only ever really been an open mic comedian and taken extra gigs and so on from time to time. And at the moment, I haven't actually performed since the end of August, but that's headspace stuff and so on, a topic for another day. But back in 2011, there was a thing. So I as part of work stuff, I speak at conferences and so on. I think it's a thing that helps my profile, I suppose, around the place. And like that, you mentioned beforehand about, you have to be good at telling people about yourself and so on. And for me, if I speak at some conference about databases and I've got the people just going, this guy knows his stuff, that's good for my business.
Okay.
Right? And so all the way back to like 20 years ago, I guess, Microsoft would ask me to speak at their conferences and so on around.
That's pretty cool.
And
Do you break out the guitar when you're doing those conferences?
So in 2010, I had already done conferences around Australia for Microsoft and a couple in the UK, and I did my first in 2010. I did my first American conference, and the guy who was organising like the content for it, he wanted to introduce, like most presentations at a conference like this are like 75 minutes long, which is great to be able to get deep into some topics or whatever. He wanted to try a different kind of format bit where he, instead of, one of those ordinary 75-minute slots, but having 6 or 7 people give 5-minute long presentations that were, at the time, he wanted them to be, he approached, kind of established speakers, and he counted me as one, even though I had never spoken at that particular event before in the States. People who would do something that was, short, sharp, shiny, I guess, but like lighthearted, potentially funny or poignant or whatever the case may be. And I basically did a comedy set, right? It was database related, loosely. It was about the differences between Australian English and UK English and American English. And so I wrote jokes like, in America, if you go for a long drive, you might stop for gas. Mm. You'd never stop for gas in Australia. You just wind the window down a bit, right? I know. I wrote a fart joke at for a conference and so on. So I did 5 minutes. It went really well, and I've still got some saved tweets. They don't call them tweets anymore, but about people just being like, "Oh my goodness, at Rob Farley is doing jokes." It's hilarious.
I'm glad you mentioned Twitter, because we're going to get to something like that very soon.
So then in 2011, I got asked to do another of these lightning talks, right? And I thought, well, I've already done, a comedy set for 5 minutes. I know, I'll write a song, so I wrote a song. Cool. And it was a nice excuse to buy a guitar in America, where it was a whole lot cheaper than buying one over here. And I performed this on the first day of the conference, and it went really well, and so on. And I had a guy from who worked at Microsoft accompanied me, because a guy that I was going to borrow a guitar from, and then so I bought a guitar instead, which actually in hindsight was really good. But and he said, can I be like, backup musician for you or whatever. I was like, sure, why not? It'll add to the sound. That's fine. And so, but it was my song. I wrote it. I sang. He just did, backup vocals and had an extra guitar as well. Okay. And so first day I did that with an audience of, 100, right? And then I was at some pub in downtown Seattle, the Tap House, and one of the conference organizers comes to me. It's about midnight. He comes to me, he's very drunk, and he's like, Rob, it's all arranged. You're doing your song. He's very drunk. You're doing your song in the closing keynote on Friday morning. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I did, with an audience of about 4,000.
Wow.
And
that's
so
a massive audience.
I walked out, I sang my song, I bowed at the end and left.
Would you even get 4,000 if you were in Melbourne? That's a nice crowd.
I don't know, but it was a conference. They weren't there to watch comedy.
Okay.
But in some ways that made it an easier audience, because
they weren't there for that comedy, so
they weren't there going, make me laugh, but they were like, this is funny.
Yeah, exactly. So it came out of nowhere.
So that was good.
Yeah.
Like, it's getting on stage to teach people about databases for a regular session, and then inadvertently making people laugh along the way. I feel like that's low hanging fruit. It's easy to make people laugh in that kind of situation.
Of course.
The thing of where I actually wrote specific jokes for 2010 and then 2011 doing the song was in many ways just kind of easy laughs. People were just like, oh yeah, this is fine. It's a bit different to the norm, whatever. Years later, like 2016, 2017, I did 4 or 5. It was called One Mic Stand back in those days. Michael Bowley ran it. It became Laugh Lap when Michael Bowley stepped away, and Jacob took over. But I'd done 4 or 5 in like 2016, 2017. I did the mostly it was at Old Rhino on Frome Street back then, and I did the last open mic there. I was the second last person on the billing. I was going to be last, and then they put someone else in. I was like, I could have had a claim to fame being the last person to do open mic at Old Rhino. And then I did the first open mic at New Rhino. And my name is on one of the cassettes as you walk up the stairs, because I gave them like $100 or something like that to help with the move. But then I stopped for ages. I stopped for nearly 4 years because I knew that I ought to be going along regularly and getting involved in the community, not just turning up when I had 5 minutes that I wanted to do, that I should actually be turning up and getting connected to people and meeting people and so on. And I didn't feel like I had the time to do that and so on. And then I got back into it because it was like that first Christmas of COVID times. And I think I'd just been around the house too much. And my wife's like, you need a hobby. And I was like, I'll go and do stand-up again. She's like, fine.
Okay.
And I was like, yep. So then I went to, I think, every Laugh Lab between February 2021 and, I don't know, like mid-2022. I don't think I missed a single one.
Nice. Do you have a favorite comedian?
I'm gonna say yes, but I feel like there's kind of like different contexts.
Like one that stands out to you more than others.
So, yeah, but it depends on the particular thing that I'm looking for. So, for instance, I love the ridiculously quick-witted puns that like Lee Mack comes up with, or that Mark Simmons does. He's another UK comedian, less famous than Lee Mack, but he's been to the Adelaide Fringe a few times. He does a lot of improv. He talks to the audience and says, "What's your hobby?" And they say like, "Oh, skydiving." He goes, "Oh, I used to do skydiving, but I fell out with my instructor." Is one of his jokes. And they're nice puns. And he
quick thinking type people.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's written a lot of jokes about a lot of topics, but he can recall them when somebody says this is what they do. And so I love that, but at the same time, I love like what Sean Lonk used to do, both on stage and on the panel shows. That was he was something special, and I think it's very sad that he's that he died. But recently I've started to respect Jimmy Carr a lot more. I mean, I totally get that he's filthy, but I feel like he used to just trade on being filthy, and he had some specials that were just, barely watchable because they were so just,
completely
like crass.
There, yeah.
But I feel like recently he's done a lot more crowd work, and quite often he comes back with responses that are not even funny necessarily, but they show a different side to him, that he's actually, very intelligent and thoughtful and so on, and he's not just crass. And I think this kind of new version of Jimmy Carr is he's remarkably good. I know that you've talked on previous shows about you've got various American comedians that are great, but there are some that really are. But
okay, so if you had your Mount Rushmore right now of 4 of your top picks, I know you've got more than 4, but if you had to put 4 right now on your so-called Mount Rushmore, who would they be?
Yeah, it's really tough.
It is, isn't it?
Because
there's just so many.
Because it's one of those things where you then see somebody else and you're like, oh yeah, them. Like I mean, when I was a kid, Bob Monkhouse was amazing. He wrote that joke that featured in the movie The Joker, the one of saying, when I was a kid, I told when I was a kid, my parents laughed when I told them I wanted to be a comedian. Well, they're not laughing now, right? It's a beautifully crafted joke that is it's an amazing joke, but it's been overdone now. You know, back in the 70s, it was, you know, it was
fresh,
new and
it was
original
new,
and so
something
on.
that-
And then by the time the Joker came out, it fit the narrative of that movie to the point of, yeah, we're not laughing now, you know, kind of a thing, and missing the joke of it. But it is a beautifully crafted joke. I'd probably say Tommy Cooper from you know, the English comedian from the 70s who wore a fez and would do bad magic, and he was hilarious. He died on stage on live television.
Yes.
He collapsed.
Yes.
And his feet were they drew the curtains and his feet were showing, and we were sitting watching it on live television.
I remember,
and it was,
me too was talking about that when he was on here, and I
was he?
And I looked up the video footage, and I looked up the still images. That was horrific.
Yeah, but we didn't know at the time.
No, I could see how people didn't know, but
they
you know,
somebody came out and they ended the TV show, and that was fine. And then later that night, it was on the news that he had died, and it was shocking. But
I saw the footage and I saw the images. It was
But at the time when we saw it happen, we just thought it was part of the act.
Yeah.
So we weren't in shock watching it. We were in shock finding out what we had just seen. You know, it's a very different thing to seeing something which is, you know, incredible and horrific, you know, like on the news. Like you see the footage from this morning or yesterday about Minneapolis, and I don't know when this goes out, but this morning or yesterday, just recently, they've had this thing in Minneapolis with an ICE officer who shot someone in their car, and there's opinions going out everywhere about it, and so on. And the footage of that is horrific, right? And it's shocking and so on. There was none of that with Tommy Cooper because we just saw him fall over and it was funny. They drew their curtains and it was funny.
Do you ever think, just from his perspective in his final moments when he collapsed, the last thing that he heard were laughs? Like, do you think
totally.
that would be the best way for a comedian to go out?
I mean,
like he didn't know. He didn't know that he knew that they didn't know that he was dying.
Yeah,
and he couldn't. And it's not like he could have asked for help in the situation that he was in. He couldn't. Even with his body, even with his body gestures, he couldn't signal for help. But knowing that he was going and all he heard was laughs at the end. Like, do you think that's like a poetic ending?
Yes, because the alternative for any kind of entertainer is that they get old and they have, 20 years where they're not working anymore. There's the exception. Like Dick Van Dyke, I think, has just turned 100 and he's still working. Sure, most people will stop working at some point. Even if they're an entertainer, they might stop working when they're 80, and then they live for a while longer, and they're no longer the entertainer. There's articles in the news about them or all that kind of stuff, but their time in the spotlight has gone. And in many ways, they may as well have died when they stopped being on stage. Their life was on stage. And so the idea of dying on stage, and I don't just mean telling jokes that nobody laughs at, that kind of dying on stage nobody wants. But the idea of your life ending, when the stage stops, I think if you had to choose a way to go as a successful, well-known, famous comedian, you got to choose that, right?
Yeah, well, it's definitely one of the most memorable things that people will never forget.
Yeah,
absolutely. And there are certain people certain celebrities who, if they weren't going to be remembered for what they've done, they want to be remembered for at least how they died. And there are people that actually have gone through elaborate ways to make sure that some even stage a massive suicide, great suicide, so they know, so they can see how great the body looked or whatever. I mean, like there were some people that were so vain they just wanted to be remembered and they didn't care how.
Yeah,
as long as they were.
I'm not a fan of that kind of thing. But you look at someone like Elvis, who, had his time as being very successful, became Fat Elvis, and then eventually died
with his head in the toilet.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's just like, and you just go, at some point your life stopped being, you stopped being Elvis. You became Fat Elvis.
Yeah.
And maybe he should have stopped at that point.
Yeah.
You look at John Lennon versus Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney has gone on to show himself to be the everlasting, pop star, and he's still touring and all that kind of stuff. But John Lennon died, in the middle of his campaigning for the world and so on. And you just go, well, obviously they had very different paths, but in some ways, dying in your prime is it's the Valhalla kind of a thing. The Viking wants to die in battle.
Yeah.
And doesn't really like the idea of just growing old and then dying in their sleep.
Yeah. I mean, it is a boring way to go. I mean, like, especially when you live a life of rebellion, doing music that people say is the devil's music, but you got famous from that music. We were talking, growing up in the 50s and 60s, how they used to call that kind of stuff devil music.
Mm-hmm. I don't like how you referred to me when you said growing up in the 50s and 60s. I was born in the mid-70s.
But we're talking about the Beatles.
I know. Yes, I know.
All right, we're talking about John McCartney and Elvis Presley. They lived in that era.
Of course. I'm just having a laugh at your expense.
Like, for them to go early, it's still a show of rebellion. I didn't live by your rules.
Yeah.
I lived my life. I lived a lifetime in my 40 years than you would in 120 kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If they even lived till 40.
Sure. And I think some of what makes Sean Locke be elevated somewhat is because he died young. Like if I compare, for example, Sean Locke with Dara O'Brien, it's just, I don't know, like I'm going to say UK-based comedians tend to be my standard go-to, but if I compare, they both had successful panel show times and so on. They're both incredibly funny. Dara still is, top of his field and all that kind of stuff. Sean, I don't know that you'd really try and separate them when they were both alive, but because Sean now has died, he's kind of been raised up to the next level. Honoured extra because he's died young, and Dara still has time to keep progressing, but because he's died young, all those people in the 27 Club, James Dean could have gone on to a lot, but died young. Amy Winehouse was a fantastic singer, will always be listed as one of the greats, but died young, and so doesn't have that longevity that many of the other top name singers, Aretha Franklin and so on, had. We never will know what Amy Winehouse could have achieved because she died at 27.
Yeah.
So many. Heath Ledger won the Oscar posthumously for his acting in The Dark Knight.
Yeah.
But we don't know what he would have gone on to achieve. So we venerate him in his death, and so it's very hard
what could have been.
Yeah, so it's very hard to pick. Whereas Tommy Cooper was already quite old, relatively old when he died. So at least he seemed to be.
Yeah, he didn't die young. He wasn't a young person when he passed.
He would have at least been in his 50s, if not 60s, I think. But people looked older, young, earlier in those days.
They did.
So
I keep seeing pictures of. This is what a 50-year-old woman looked like in 1975.
Right.
This is what a 50-year-old woman looks like today.
Right.
I
remember the TV show Different Strokes, and thinking that the dad looked like he was. These days, you'd look at the dad and be like, "You're like 60, right?" But I think he was like 35.
Yeah, he looked so old.
And it's just like, what?
Yeah, he looked so. He looked like he was pushing 80.
Yeah, like George and Cliff from Cheers. No, not George Vent. Norm from Cheers. George Vent and John Ratzenberger. Yeah. Norm and Cliff from the bar in Cheers.
They were in their 30s.
They were in their 30s. Exactly. And these days it's like, no, surely they would have been in their 50s.
Yeah.
But no, when the show started, they were in their 30s and they looked the same as what they were when the show ended.
Yeah.
It's just like, how? But yeah, so I don't know how old Tommy Cooper really got to. But But I think so. He would definitely be on my panel. The rest, it's really hard to know because there are people who have changed comedy, and so on. I mean,
do you think the audience has changed as more than the comedy has changed, or has comedy changed with the audience, kind of thing?
I don't want to. So I think the world has changed more so than audiences have changed, because so I look at the 70s where there were, fat blokes with skinny microphones doing jokes about mothers-in-law and and the and material that would these days be considered dad jokes at best, but really they'd just be like, that's just a sexist piece of rubbish or whatever. And these days you just go, yeah, the world doesn't put up with that anymore. You look at Blazing Saddles, and you just go, there's a lot of racist jokes in that.
Yeah, but
and you go, yeah, but, and you go, well, the jokes for the time, was it okay? And you just go, well, it was more that I think the world knew that it wasn't really okay, but they just went, yeah, whatever, right? And I think these days it's more just that the world has realized that, that the idea of comedy is not to get up and offend. People talk about how comedians are, and I think it's what you're getting to, but it's the last bastion of free speech and so on, and they should say the truth, and they should, and they can say what they like, and if they can make it funny, then they can say what they like, and they can be offensive and so on. And I just look at it and I go, but trying to disguise material that is cruel and uncompassionate and at somebody else's expense and punching down and so on, even if it's funny, it should, the concept of if it's funny, it's okay. I'm just like, well, that should only be if it's universally funny. And if you're punching down, there's people that don't find that funny. And I don't think it's that audiences no longer find that it's funny. I think it's just that society just goes, that's awkward because we understand privilege better than we used to. And we understand, we've seen that billionaires are not allowed to get away with sex trafficking and these kinds of things, where it used to be that people just like, the rules are different for them. But they're not. And they should never have been. No, they shouldn't have been. And I don't think the rules are different for comedians either. I think as comedians, we should actually be trying to say, well, we're gonna, we're crafting what we say, and we're gonna do it better, and we don't need to scrape the barrel. I think when you look at, I'm going to say like professional comedians versus people who are trying to find their voice and trying new things at open mics and stuff like that. In that open mic community, you're much more likely to find people who are struggling to work out, what they can and can't say. By the time someone is I suppose recognized, they shouldn't be needing to be offensive. Now, there's things like using language that somebody might take as offensive, and I go, that's a different kind of offensive.
That's just blasphemy kind of thing.
The idea of saying something, okay, well, right, blasphemy is a whole other thing. The idea of using, a curse word, a swear word, whatever. Somebody who says, like that person's whatever, right? Laurie Bell has a great thing that she says about hecklers. But she says, so if you're one of those people who likes to shout out when someone else is performing, what's the word? What's the word? And someone, of course, in the audience says, hecklers. And she goes, no, that's not it. And then she says the C word, right? To be able to go, no, that's what you're being if you're shouting out while someone else is performing. And I go, that's clever use of the word that Americans in particular will find offensive.
Yeah.
And it's just like, but that's using it creatively. I get that. I'm okay with that. I don't consider that to be offensive in the same kind of way. Whereas if I see somebody doing jokes about, well, for example, the Charlie Hebdo thing of the French cartoonist, right, draws a satirical cartoon for a newspaper about Muhammad.
Yeah, I remember
and
that.
of course, Muslims all around the world were just like, oh my goodness, this is offensive to us.
Yeah.
And they were right to be offended. It was trying to be offensive. I totally get that Charlie Hebdo, I want to say, should be able to get away with that, but actually, in the same time, should have known better.
Okay,
Right?
but here's a little debate.
Oh, and of course it's a debate. I'm not saying that everyone needs to agree with me.
No. South Park did an episode.
Sure.
Super Best Friends. I don't know. It was an episode called Super Best Friends where all the prophets from all religions get together like they're superheroes.
Sure.
And Muhammad was there.
Yeah.
But that didn't create any kind of
Backlash.
animosity or backlash or anything. That was like
Sure.
One would ask themselves, well, why is that acceptable and that is not?
Because I feel like it's coming from what's the sentiment behind it. When they're saying, look, here's a group. Now I haven't seen the episode, right?
Yeah.
Here's a bunch of here's representatives from every religion, and we're gonna make like they've got like they're superheroes and are going around saving the world or whatever kind of a thing. It's not drawing out any one particular thing, right? I mean, I know Christians who don't like the fact that hospitals have multi-faith rooms because they're just like, what, I'm supposed to go and pray in a room that, where they're going to invite somebody from a different religion in to pray? Like, what the heck? So I know various people from actually a few different religions who won't use those multi-faith prayer rooms in hospitals. And I go, but the sentiment of what the hospital is trying to do is just say, we're going to provide a place for you to pray. We don't want to have to try to cover everyone with private spaces and then find that we've missed somebody. So we're just going to say, here is a general room that anybody can use to come and pray.
That's clever.
And I see that the South Park thing is similar. They're just going, we're going to try and cover all religions here. We're not trying to be offensive to anyone, but we're just trying to...
They didn't single anybody out.
Right. Whereas I think was when there was that cartoon of Muhammad, satirical, arguably offensive. I'm not a Muslim. I get that they revere the Prophet Muhammad. I don't expect that Muslims would expect me to. I don't expect that a Muslim respects Jesus the way that I do, and so on. It's just, it's different, right? So, but I think if somebody is targeting, let's make fun of this person that is revered by this group of people, I think that's a cheap shot in many ways. That's kind of trying to be offensive. And I think a good comedian should be more clever than that. If you're getting on stage to tell original jokes, and they should always be original, the idea of stealing someone's joke is lousy. If you don't realize that you're stealing it, then that's different. But either way.
Because some people might tackle the same issue.
Sure.
And maybe tell it in a different way, which might...
Yeah, and somebody might accidentally write a joke that someone else has written and so on, in which case, well, they should actually... If somebody says, oh, by the way, someone's done a version of that joke, they should then cut it and just be like, okay, it's not new. It's been in my subconscious, but whatever. So it's like writing a song. Ed Sheeran says, no, none of them are original. I think comedy is different to music. But I think that somebody who is smart enough to get up on stage and tell jokes should be smart enough to be able to do that without just offending any particular branch of the community. Mm-hmm. If you get up and you go, trans women, they're just blokes, aren't they? That's not funny. That's just offensive, right? And if you try and say, well, it's funny...
There is a way of saying it to make it sound funny, but if you're being so direct and blunt about it, it's like more like you're forming your own opinion.
But you know what?
More than it is a joke.
Even if that's just the premise of your joke, there are people within the community, and you are targeting them. That's punching down.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you found a way to make it funny. No, you're still taking advantage of a group that has enough discrimination already. Mm-hmm. You don't need to do that. So I don't think that its audiences have changed. I think the world has changed. I think people make excuses for comedians being offensive, and I think comedians should be better than that. And I don't think if comedians should be offensive, because I think most comedians are smart enough to not be.
Yeah. There are certain questions that I wanted to ask, but we have gone over time, so I want to get to the fun stuff.
Sure.
I
didn't finish answering your question about the Mount Rushmore of comedians,
fine.
but I don't
Fine.
want to answer that
That's
question.
fine.
Ask what you like. You can cut stuff out.
No. This is a game that I wanted to that I've got myself familiar with. It's called Quote or Twitter.
Oh, okay, sure.
So quote versus things said on Twitter, and you have to guess what I'm going to say, if it's a quote,
okay,
or Twitter. And there's a bonus point for you if you can even name the person who came up with this quote. Or,
sure.
Okay. Now, the number one, quote or Twitter. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players.
That's Shakespeare, of course.
Wonderful.
But
like
it's from...
As you like it.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, no, well done.
But it's not men and women merely players. But either way.
Yeah, fine. Okay, so you got that. That's a quote.
Sure.
All right, so quote or Twitter.
Yeah.
How much is 5K in dollars?
That's just somebody asking on Twitter. That's
That's a Twitter.
And the answer is 3.1 miles.
This is where it gets, I just like how
yeah, no, I know.
How we've declined as a people.
No kidding. But at the end of the day, social media has no filter for intelligence.
Okay. This could be a tricky one here. Quote or Twitter. So it's a book of pictures, largely with statements, but a book of pictures. Would you say that as a quote or a Twitter?
I'm going to say that's a quote, but I can't think. Well,
you're correct. It is a quote, and Donald Trump said that.
Oh, of course. Yes.
Okay. Here we go. We got two more. Quote or Twitter. I have never seen a thin person drink Diet Coke.
I think that's a quote.
You correct.
Like, I think that's someone like...
If you had to guess who that person is that said that.
I've got a feeling it's someone like Anna Kendrick.
Well, it's actually Donald Trump again.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Doesn't he drink Diet Coke?
I guess so, and he's not thin either. Here we go.
He thinks he is.
Final one, quote or Twitter.
Yeah.
Is it Ray Fiennes or is it Ralph Fiennes?
Well, okay, so the thing is that if that's... That's a spoken thing, so I don't want it to be Twitter, but I think it is Twitter. I think the person wrote about how to...
I couldn't find any funny Twitter ones, so I wrote that one myself.
Did you?
Yeah, I created that one.
Okay, that's the thing. I feel like it's the thing of I don't know how you would write that.
You couldn't. I wrote Ray Fine, like and then Ralph Fiennes.
Yes,
Ralph. Because when I read Ray, whenever I see a preview, whenever I see a preview of what this man is in, they put his name, RALPH.
I know it looks like
FIENESS, and they're calling him Ray Fiennes, and that's not how it's spelled.
Yeah,
so that's Ralph Fiennes.
Yes.
So Ray Fiennes is RAYFINES.
Rafe is kind of like the posh way of saying Ralph.
Yeah.
But he's the only person I know who has that name who says it as Rafe.
Yeah, that's fine. One final question I'd like to ask you before we get onto the conclusion is, if you could do your comedy for any audience in history,
sure,
which time period would you choose?
Okay, so for me personally, I I wish that I hadn't started in my 40s. I wish that I had have started, when I was in school, because in high school, I played rugby union, and there really wasn't the space for playing rugby for the school and being in, the school play and doing that kind of thing. It was, if you were going to be into sport to the amount that I was, there wasn't space for doing like the arts as well. And so I never really, and I was at school with Matt Lucas, and so like from Little Britain. Mm-hmm. And Sacha Baron Cohen was a couple of years ahead. And so the school produced people who, became famous in the arts. But I wasn't part of that because I was doing sport. And it would have been nice to have realised it back then in school and been able to start doing comedy like as soon as I was old enough. If I could go back and do that, sure. But as far as me, the age I am, if you want to just kind of put me into a time frame, I'd say the 80s, because I feel like the world was starting to go through this shift in comedy. There had been the old blokes within microphones kind of phase where, they'd had like Lucille Ball and various other, Carol Burnett and so on, like American women who were famous and funny and so on. But I feel like the 80s saw some new generations and new styles of comedy come through, and it felt fresher than it had done before. Mm. It wasn't just a whole bunch of people that just looked the same.
Yeah.
Johnny Carson, Les Dawson, all kinds of, comedians who, may as well have just been the same person.
Yeah.
Bob Hope's no different to any of the others. Talented comedian, of course, but no different. And then in the 80s, we saw just, new generations come through. That then spread into the 90s. And of course, we saw, Jerry Seinfeld come through and go, hey, there are comedy clubs where you can see this kind of a thing, by putting it into his, and kind of highlighted, actually, there is comedy that you can see. And I feel like that time from mid-80s through to early 90s, and early 90s being the earliest that I could have got into it based on just my age, that would have been a good time, I think, to be doing comedy. But I've only lived in Adelaide for 20-something years now, so, and I wouldn't want to be trying to do that here. I would be wanting to do it somewhere else, like London like London.
Yeah,
where
80s in Adelaide in terms of the comedy scene was, you wouldn't, I don't recall a time you see a famous comedian in the 80s that was from Adelaide. That just didn't happen.
Well, and even now it feels like most comedians who are from Adelaide don't stay in Adelaide. But I listen to the Comedian's Comedian podcast, and they talk to famous people like Sarah Millican and so on, and they talk to them about things like, so what made you decide that you could quit your job and become a full-time comic? And almost always they're just like, well, it's when I realized that my calendar could always stay full, because, I'd do a week of stuff and I'd be like, okay, I did 7 gigs this week. I need 7 more for that week that's in a few months' time. And I just would realize that I could just maintain my calendar, making sure that I had gigs, knowing that if I'm doing, 6 or 7 gigs a week, I'm improving. If I'm only doing 3 or 4, I'm not improving. And I'm just looking at that, just going, wow. In Adelaide, you'd be lucky to be able to get, 3 a month, let alone 6 a week. And they refer to like the early days of comedy in London, where there were only about 25 comedy venues that you could turn up and try and get a spot. And I was like, it's a different world. Mm. And so, yeah, by all means, I would happily go and try comedy in a different time. But I think doing comedy in a different place, where you can actually be like, I want to try and do 7 gigs a week. Even just some way that I could do 2 gigs a night would be amazing, And I mean, I'm not at a stage where I want to leave and try and go to London and try and make it as a comic. I mean, I'm in my 50s now. I'm not trying to make it as a professional comedian. It's a nice hobby to have.
Yeah,
but and it's a stretch, and I think it's good for mental health and all kinds of stuff like that.
Oh, most definitely. I'm surprised that when we talked about the 80s, you didn't mention the rising star who revolutionized comedy, which I believe was Eddie Murphy.
See, like as a kid, I remember that that Delirious and Raw were these two, like videos that would get passed around school and so on, and that was amazing. And but in many ways, that was kind of like demonstrating that comedy could be edgy and and filthy and so on, and still be like popular and money making and hysterical and so on
as well.
But of course,
but the thing is, with all kinds of arts, it's always about trying to push the boundaries.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Like some people push them, some people break them, some people create new boundaries.
Yeah.
Like South Park, for example, these are the people that broke all the rules. They created their own rules and they broke them too.
Totally.
I mean, it's the only show that I know of that still till this day continues to get sued, but they win the lawsuits every time. Nobody's beaten them.
Yeah.
Like Trump tried to sue them.
Sure.
Because they made fun of his penis and being so small. And he was demanding hundreds of millions of dollars for them. And they said to their lawyers, okay, we'll give him those hundreds of millions of dollars, but he has to get in court, take off his pants and show us how incorrect we are about his penis. And then he withdrew the lawsuit.
Sure.
I mean, like, who had the balls to do that about South Park?
Of course.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I mean, there along the way, there have certainly been people who I feel like have changed the landscape of comedy. And Eddie Murphy would be considered one of them. A bunch of people at the time, like Richard Pryor and so on, that were making it big on stages.
Yeah, but
especially
Richard Pryor was on the Ed Sullivan Show. We're talking late 50s, early 60s here.
Of course.
So I mean, his peak was the 70s, but he still had like a reverberation effect of the 80s. To the late 80s even.
Yep.
Until he started to get ill and couldn't do it no more.
Yeah. And so but I feel like back in those days there were a lot of people who were coming through who were just not quite the same as what comedy had been. And I think that was good in a lot of ways. And so it would be nice to be part of that. But I don't know. I don't know that I'm a good enough comedian to have been part of all of that, but it would have been nice to have been. That's where I would have liked to have started earlier, because I feel like when you could find your voice and your I'm going to say swagger, your style on stage and all of that kind of stuff, and then it becomes that longevity thing where you can be like, okay, this is what I'm like, and you can move through that. It's one of my biggest regrets in comedy was in 1999. So this is before I'd even done much like public speaking type stuff. Certainly hadn't done conferences and all that kind of thing. But I was working for a company in Melbourne, just an IT consultancy, and the boss's wife was Mark Downey from Fast Forward.
Oh yes,
the one who so Mark Downey was she did the Yarn Event character, and she did she was Chenille from the House of Chenille, and the SBS newsreader. Can't wait for that one, and so on. Worked alongside Magda Szubanski and all the people that went on to be in Kath and Kim. And in fact, she was in Kath and Kim. She was the married celebrant who married them on that episode, and so on. And she used to call the office every now and then, and whenever the receptionist was out, I tended to be the person who'd pick up the phone and be like, oh yeah, hi Mark, yeah, no, he's busy at the moment, I'll get him to call you back, and so on. And then there was the Christmas party. So I kind of knew who she was, and she knew who I was from like 98 sometime. And then the Christmas party of 99, my wife is pregnant with our second child, and most of the spouses of my colleagues and so on just like, oh, famous person over there, oh my goodness, and my colleagues would be like, yeah, no, that's the boss's wife, we're not talking to her, and I'd be just like, well, whatever, it's just a person. I went and sat and chatted to Mark, and it turns out we had mutual friends and stuff like that, and we chatted for a while, and and then she says to me, so Rob, I want to get back into radio, and I want to find somebody to work with that's kind of like a double act type person and so on. Do you want to be that person? You could, you'd need to come round and we'd work on comedy together and all that kind of stuff. And my biggest regret is that my response was, I can't imagine Paul, the boss, going for that. And she was like, yeah, you're probably right. And it was gone. Right? Okay. Because at the time, I had a long commute every day. I lived down in the Frankston area and was working up in town, and the boss lived in Toorak, and and the idea of, I've got to set my second child on the way, like he was born in early February in 2000, and the idea of, I'm not just going to go straight home at night. I'm going to go and work on comedy with the boss's wife. I don't know how it really would have worked. I don't think my wife was really in favour of the idea, and I don't think my boss, her husband, would have been really keen on the idea either. But I look at it, I just go, man, that would have been such an amazing opportunity. I was 25 at the time.
Oh, what could have been? What could have been? Listen, we had to get to the end.
It could have been amazing. So that's my biggest regret.
Okay.
And so if you could take me back to then, I do things differently. But and that was in Melbourne. So, okay. But yeah.
Well, we've come to the conclusion. I'm going to ask you a series of 10 questions.
Sure.
Short answers, please.
Yep.
Because that's the whole point of these questions.
That's cool. Yep.
And let's see how we can go. What is your favourite word?
There are words that are fun to say. I like the word gesticulating, like talking with your hands, but I actually kind of prefer testiculating, which is to talk with your hands, talking bollocks.
Okay. What is your least favourite word?
I'm gonna say like most swear words, like F and C and so on.
Okay.
Because people, especially comics,
there is no because.
Cheap laughs.
Just the least favourite word. Sure. Don't need an explanation.
I think it's necessary.
What turns you on?
People being like like present in the room, in the being switched on and so on, like not just kind of disengaging.
Mm-hmm. What turns you off?
Back pain and mental health issues and all kinds of stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, this might be a difficult one for you to answer. What is your favourite curse word?
Bollocks.
Okay. What sound or noise do you love?
Like the noise of people mingling, laughing, that kind of thing. Nice. If I'm on stage, of course, laughter.
Yeah, that's good. I like that too. What sound or noise do you hate?
It's too easy to say, like the silence when I've just said a joke. But like trucks reversing.
Okay. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Psychology, but only for people who want to get fixed.
Okay. What profession would you not like to do?
Psychology for people who just go to the psychologist and talk about their stuff and don't actually ever, have an appetite for trying to sort out their crap.
Okay. And finally, Rob, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say to you when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Well done, my good and faithful servant.
Oh, that's a nice one. I like that. My favourite one still, I've had some good answers. Stu came up with a good one. His answer was, what are you drinking? And that's such a we Stu thing to say.
Sure.
And my favorite one till this day is still Mo Dang when he said, "You're not supposed to be here yet." It's like very, very creative answer. Rob, thanks for being on the show. Hope you had a good time.
Yeah, it was
hope you
fun.
enjoyed yourself. And I hope wish we could do it again sometime. I always encourage guests to return. And again, for my audience, thanks for joining me on season 2, episode 2 of the Magic Hour, and I hope to see you again in the future. And please be sure to subscribe follow me on my Instagram at Fame Film Agency, and subscribe to my YouTube at Majid Andary, and be sure to follow Rob on his Instagram, which is right over there. And until next time, everybody, take care.
Thanks.
I'm broke, bitch.